thank you everybody for joining us. Michelle and I are so excited to welcome everybody back to our second webinar in this series. This is an assets-based approach to community violence prevention and intervention. We really want to stress the asset side of that because it's not just about preventing and intervening. It's really about using our resources, particularly our youth, who are the experts in their own lives, so to speak, with us guiding them. So we're trying to refocus and have that asset-based approach to everything. But today's webinar is specifically called Strengthening Community Safety Through Proactive Planning and Partnerships. And we have quite a lineup for you today. Some great, an amazing guest speaker who's joining us, and I'll introduce him in just a second. And of course, we have our education leaders online. I see Ms. Andrea Jackson joined us right there. Hi. Hope that you're safe and warm.
I am. Thank you.
And we do have Dr. Janelle Wood, who's with us, who's going to speak in just a second, and hopefully we'll have a few more others joining us. We, of course, have the entire intact team, including our leadership structure, as well as our partners on the line. So we're so thankful to everybody for joining us. This is the second webinar in our series, and as you can see on the screen, we have a total of 6, because we're not just going to leave you with one, we're going to leave you wanting more. And don't worry, we have 4 more for you to provide. Our next webinar is going to look sometime in February. We're thinking probably the latter part of February. We're still working out with our partners to get an exact date, but be on the lookout for that. And then, of course, we have 4, 5, and 6 continuing throughout the year. We will be wrapped up by August of this year with this series, and then we'll be looking at our next series. So please give us feedback on what you would like to see next. Without further ado, though, we would like to give some time over to Dr. Janelle Wood to give us kind of some opening messages. Dr. Wood is one of the 21st CCLC program officers at the U.S. Department of Education. And one little thing I know about Dr. Wood is inside her heart, she loves kids, because every meeting we have, she talks about always reflecting things back to the youth. And that message really hits home with me and drives everything we do. So Dr. Wood, welcome. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's webinar.
Thank you, Sean. And good afternoon and welcome everyone to the second webinar in this series, as Sean said, on asset-based approaches to community violence prevention and intervention. We are pleased to have you join us today as we continue this conversation on how to support young people and families so that they feel safe and seen and heard. And as Sean mentioned, you'll notice from the title of this session that instead of focusing on a deficit model where the focus is on what's missing or what's wrong, we're taking an asset-based approach where we focus our attention on what we can build upon and strengthen. Throughout this series, we will learn how asset mapping can be used to identify community strengths and resources for addressing concerns. And we'll think about strategies to center youth in this work and talk about how to effectively engage community leaders in proactive safety planning. The tools and the strategies that you'll hear about today, along with insights from our colleagues at the Readiness and Emergency Management of Schools TA Center, can help you amplify the great work that's already being done in your programs. These preventative approaches, from asset mapping to restorative practices, are about creating solutions that work for your communities. We all know that out-of-school time programs play an essential role in fostering safe and supportive environments and creating spaces of connection and opportunity for youth and families in every size community. Now, I grew up in a small rural town, population of about 1,500, and until recently, we didn't even have a traffic light. Now we have a traffic light and a Buc-ee's. So to an outsider, it probably looked like there wasn't much there to do, and certainly no community assets to speak of. But I would argue that my hometown was rich with assets, from the corner church that reinforced literacy and where I learned to take notes. That was an asset. And to my K-8 school, where magical things happened every day, an asset. To the lone restaurant that would provide the best soft serve ice cream on the planet as a reward to students, an asset. And of course, all the grandparents, the aunties, and uncles who looked out for all the kids in the neighborhood. Those were assets. I believe that most of us wouldn't be here today doing this work without having access to some level of community support. And so by participating in this webinar series, this is one way that we can pay it forward and invest in our greatest assets, the young people and the families that we serve. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn it back over to Sean and Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Wood, for giving your remarks and taking us to your small rural town that you grew up in. And it kind of makes me reflect. I live on a small island, so I I definitely understand how it can look like there's not a lot of community assets, but like you said, there definitely is. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar. I'm just going to go through our vision and mission for the 21st CCLC NTAC and also our priorities. Our main vision, which goes back to what Dr. Wood said, is for us to provide, the SEA coordinators and also out-of-school time professionals with knowledge and skills to implement programming. And we really want those programs to engage and empower the students and their families so that we have lasting lifelong learners. And then our mission at NTAC is to provide best practices, evidence-based resources, and also professional learning opportunities for all of our stakeholders, whether that be our SEAs, our subgrantees, and all of our out-of-school time programs that serve youth and families. And so NTAC's priorities, the priorities that we're focusing on are 7 different areas, and they're based on guidance that came from the Department of Education and what we've heard from all of you, from 21st CCLC professionals. What kind of help do you want? What do you need? And so you'll see here the 7 different priorities, and then the arrows going from programmatic to student focused. And so based on our community violence prevention and intervention work, we're trying to find out within these priorities, where does this work fall into? How can we support these priorities? And so those areas can be in the pandemic recovery supports, also ensuring program staff have what you need, making sure that there's equitable access to different resources, and also student supports in social emotional learning and academic needs. All right. And so now we're really excited because we're going to watch a short video from a program in Montana. And this is where we really want to bring in our youth voice into this work that we're doing as we're covering all these webinars and really hearing from students, as to how this work that we're talking about today impacts them. So Sean, I'll pass it to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. One thing I failed to do, Michelle, is talk about in our previous webinar series, we really discussed the value of partnerships, and we heard from various programs up in Chicago with Act Now, as well as in Lubbock, ISD here in Texas. We heard about how the power of 21st century and after school can affect kids. In today's video from Montana, definitely highlights that. So the question we ask them is, what does 21st century programs mean to you? And then what type of places? Is it a safe space? Is it somewhere that you trust? And here's kind of the responses. We're going to hear from 2 students and a paraprofessional about their experience.
I don't live near anybody. My nearest neighbor is like over a mile away. So like growing up, I wouldn't have like access to like friends as much. And the after school program was really good because of that. And I was able to meet a bunch of really cool people and really like search for what I want to do when I grow up and the type of person I want to be. What after school programs are really cool is that you're able to express yourself in many different ways, and every other day we'll be doing something different.
for the past couple of years, I've been Rocky Boy Elementary 21st Century mentor. The younger kids, I think it's just someone to look up to, you know, somebody like the big brother, big sister type role, somebody that they could rely on to help them with something. Hopefully, when they grow up, they may be able to do something, you know. And for high school, I feel like it's good because like it keeps them someplace outside rather than or someplace inside the school rather than out there on the streets. Because yeah, I just feel like it's better to have them here, you know, with kids somewhere like where they could like hopefully help develop, you know, for like a better generation. I think it gives them like a nice role model to look up to because I noticed that nobody wanted to join exercising club this year, and when me and Miss Uste were standing there, I started flashing around. This one kid came up. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like a Vincent type kid. But he came up like that. He's like, "Could I be like that?" I was like, "Of course you can. Just work out for a couple of years." And yeah, I don't know. It felt nice to be like, how do you say it, like an inspiration to somebody. I don't know. I never thought about anything that way. It's pretty nice.
One of the unique perspectives I have is that I started attending 21st century programs when I was probably early elementary, fourth grade, and now at almost 30, I'm back and working in the program and really instilled a love of just the program and the way it runs and the kids, so you just can't escape it when it's good. They were just really good at combining all aspects of learning, just the academic, the social, the athletic, and it was nice to have that because being homeschooled, you don't get, you know, PE's not a big thing. And also just the sense of community and friendship. They need that in a rural area because there's not a lot of people to hang out with, and a lot of them live far away from town or out of town. So to have somewhere central for kids to be able to make connections that might last their whole lives is very important. I think the effects on the students of being in 21st century that I've noticed in the classrooms is they hold themselves to a higher standard because they know when the bell rings, their day's not over. They have to continue, and sometimes their after-school teachers are teachers that they see during the day, so they know that if this is my behavior in the classroom, when the bell rings, it's going to follow me to after school. So they do hold themselves to a higher standard because they want after school to be fun. So they do hold themselves to that standard, which is very cool to see.
All right. Thank you for watching that video with us. We were very thankful to Montana 21st CCLC programs who provided that those amazing student testimonials, as well as a paraprofessional who not only was in the program, but came back and worked in the program. They always say the best measure of a program is, do kids run away or do they run to the program? Well, in this case, she came back and is working in the program. So that's a big statement for Montana. Good job. But Michelle, that was exactly what we're talking about is, you know, I love the student who said he gave a, you know, he was kind of a mentor, an example to a youth, and that he felt that it's better to have them in the after school program in the 21st century program than it is to have them on the street. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about. What do you think?
Yeah, Sean, I agree. I think that safety is something that we can sometimes take for granted in schools and in after-school programs. But the reality is that safety definitely is achieved as we all work together and we have proactive efforts. And there's so many great resources and assets available to our programs to ensure that our students are safe every day. I would say 21st century programs and after school programs need to just be a very great active part in creating safe learning environments for the kids that we serve. Our families send them to us, and they really expect that we're keeping them safe. And this includes, I would say, collaborating with community partners, like as Dr. Wood said earlier, to really enhance the safety measures that might already be in place in schools. So things that are happening during the school day, students are already being trained, you know, they're doing these drills, and so they're already used to it. So bridging that over into the after school time can be a really great way for them to just reinforce things that they're already doing during the school day.
So,
But, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
oh no, well, I had a question. We have on the screen something called proactive safety. So I know, our locations need to be safe and secure, but what is proactive safety?
Well, I would say proactive safety would be that we're doing things prior to needing emergency management, prior to any of the tools that we might even talk about today that come in, after the fact, but really, finding those assets that we talked about before and being proactive. There's some really great examples here on the screen about, making sure that safety is a priority for our programs. And then, as I was saying, building on the safety measures that are already being done during the school day. And we definitely want to make sure that we're using best practices and working with our community partners also.
So is there one of the questions we had when we sent out the registration for this webinar, one of the questions was, is there like a federal mandate to do a certain type of emergency drill or emergency planning, or what are the rules? What is the have to, and then where do we go from there?
Yeah, Sean, there is a federal mandate to provide safe and secure environments for children in our after school programs. But there are specific requirements that are typically left up to the states or the school districts themselves. These practices, even though they're mandated, are considered best practices. And so at the end of the day, we really want to make sure that we take a good hard look at what we're doing because, as I said, we're entrusting, our families are entrusting us with the students that we serve through the out of school time programming.
So I know as we're looking at proactive safety, not waiting till things happen, but proactively getting ready for it. One of the tools that after school programs use is asset mapping, kind of aligning community assets to school assets to build a safety plan. Um, are there any best practices or things that work in 21st century or some resources that you would like to share?
Sure. Our 21st century programs traditionally already conduct annual needs assessments. And so a lot of times that already includes that asset mapping that we were talking about. And our guest today is going to highlight some of those tools and really emphasize the safety aspect of asset mapping. And so, for example, trusted partners, youth leaders, school leaders, and staff, even our local law enforcement, and other community organizations can bring valuable assets and resources into our after school programs. One approach with that would be on the screen, there is the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, our REMS center. Developed a crime prevention through environmental design fact sheet. Sorry, that's a lot of words that you see on there that will definitely help support that. And then also there's a toolkit on the other side called developing and enhancing memorandums of understanding with community partners. So really making sure that those MOUs with our community partners are set in place.
Wow, and I know Capella just dropped those links in the chat for folks to download, and also on our key takeaway sheet today, we have those resources. I love that. I love the fact that there's a resource for the methodology behind it, and that there's this training on MOUs. Because I know when I was in the field, how do you get solid agreements with partners was always a challenge for me. But who's this thing you keep mentioning, REMS? What is REMS? It's not a performing group, right? It's not like that. It's something to do with what we're talking about today. Is that right?
Right, yes. And so we'll just stick with REMS from now on, so I don't have to say all of it and get tongue twisted. But I definitely recommend everyone, after today's webinar, you do go in and check out the REMS TA Center. They have a great website. This is what it would look like when you first get in there. And it's an excellent resource hub. There is so much in there, tools, guidance, best practices. And it will really support your planning for your after school programs to ensure that they are safe learning environments for our students.
That's awesome, and we're so honored. I know we have the project director of the REMS TA Center on the line today. She's here. We're very thankful to have Janelle Hughes with us, as well as other members of her team, and we're very excited to have our special guest today, who you know, not only is he joining us today, but I understand that he also just recently did a podcast for the REMS TA Center that will be released soon. So excited to have Steve Harris from the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, commonly known as the REMS TA Center, joining us. Steve, goodness, you are a man of many talents. You've been a national instructor and curriculum director. You have 28 years of experience. So you started like when you were 2, right? Uh, working with K through 12 schools, higher education. You've even worked on emergency experiences, things like terrorist advisory, like how to do counterterrorism and things like that. You are amazing. How are you today?
Hey, Sean, I knew I liked you right away. You're great. Hey, thanks so much for that nice introduction. Yeah, I've had, it's actually 30 years of experience now, and I've been very fortunate to work with the REMS TA Center for about 20 years on a part-time basis as one of my side jobs. So I really enjoy that group, and I'm going to talk about a plethora of resources that the REMS TA Center has to offer as well. So thanks so much for having me today, Michelle, Sean, Dr. Wood. Really appreciate the opportunity. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that as part of just kind of an introductory statement, if you'll allow me, just to make sure that we thank the participants who are on today. It's probably a thankless job, pretty much in education, whether it's whatever position you're in. People forget maybe to thank you, but they should. So I just want to make sure you know you're appreciated. What you do matters every day. So please know that. And it's very important, providing in what my context of what I'm going to talk about safety, security, and emergency planning in your center. So thank you for that very nice introduction, Sean.
Well, no, thank you. And Michelle and I were talking before we came on. It's just so funny because, and I have to share this, as this is going to be a surprise to Steve. But when we came on, Steve let us know he shaved off his winter beard, and he's like, "I want to kind of look like my picture." And I'm like, "You do?" And he's like, "Well, that picture was taken a little while ago." And I'm like, "You are like everlasting. Like you are like Gandalf. You're just there." So congrats. We're so excited, and thank you so much for calling out and thanking our participants. I think you're exactly right. The work that we ask folks to do is a lot, and the fact that they carry through every single day and are so dedicated to kids just is why we do what we do. So excited. Today's interview is going to be kind of an organic style, everybody. If you want to ask questions, we do have a Q&A function, but we also have the chat. We'll be monitoring both. We have folks monitoring chat for us, and they'll make sure that Michelle's kind of my catalyst. She'll make sure that I don't forget anything. And we will keep to time. So we got about 40 minutes to have this discussion with Steve. Both Steve and I are verbose, apparently, or at least I am. So Michelle will make sure that we stay on time. But I'm going to kick us off with our first question, which really has to do with these key safety planning mission areas, which I believe are prevention, protection, response, recovery, and mitigation. And we're going to discuss a little bit about the role of after school in safety planning. But I have to ask this question. One of the best practices, Steve, that they've told us is when the school has a planning team for emergency operation planning, they've told us that after school should be a part of that. Do you agree with that statement?
Absolutely, Sean. Yeah, one of the foundational pieces when we're talking about this 6-step federal process that's been vetted by 5 federal agencies, and sadly happened after a tragic incident at Sandy Hook, which created, I'm sorry, I'm giving a lot of background, which created these planning guides for high quality planning guides for development of emergency operations plans. The foundational step is to form a collaborative team. And certainly OST or after school program personnel are part of that. Generally, that school planning team is, just to let you know, and I know probably many of your listeners here are familiar with that, or, an administrator, any type of law enforcement, school resource officer, security personnel, facilities person, emergency management, maybe locally or from the district, the fire department. And then there's also generally a district representative. There's also generally ad hoc members that are really important that may not come to every meeting, but are very contributory in the fact that they bring a lot to the table. And after school program managers are definitely that, cafeteria managers, transportation directors, all these types of individuals that are a part of this overall emergency operations plan. So going around a long way to get to your answer is just to tell you that it certainly is. But I think foundationally, it's important to know that collaborative team is so important to form in the first place.
Does and I know Michelle has a question too, but I just want to do a follow-up real quick. Does every school do emergency planning? Like, is this like a thing? Or is it just a really good practice that really good operations do? Or I'm just kind of trying to figure it out because I know when I worked in the after school program, I didn't really think about it. I just thought it was safe. I just participated. I just did my thing, you know? But now that I'm in this role and I'm listening, it's like, there's a committee, it's got like all these people in there, and I'm like, wow, is this normal?
Yeah, a great question. And yes, it's definitely a best practice. And a lot of states do mandate, the foundational team, and then they mandate certain requirements for emergency operations plans. Certainly a best practice from the federal government to have the 6-step process, which includes the foundational part of that by forming an emergency planning team. For the aftercare or OST personnel, 21st century personnel, certainly, as I understand it, in a lot of the traditional formats that I see in the state of Georgia, or the programs are being held in a traditional school in some part of the building. But I know there are some boys and girls clubs, there are Y clubs, community centers, there are a lot of different ways. And a lot of those, the ones that I mentioned, the latter part, the boys and girls clubs, community centers, and Ys, they all have, in my experience, in working with them, have really good and robust emergency operations plans. Sometimes I think that the after school programs may not have the attention that they need devoted to them, particularly by the school, to provide that connection or the relationships to the emergency plan, which are so vital. Yes, some states may require or may not require that after school program to have an emergency plan, but it certainly is a best practice to do so and have that collaborative team to work.
That's awesome. I know in the chat we have a few folks who are sharing a little bit about like who they have uh are using in their planning and everything. But I believe that Michelle has a question about possibly some of the logistics or the how-to of that.
And I'm sorry, Sean, I dropped because my internet went out.
I know. We were good though.
Okay. And so we're on like our second interview question, just to be clear.
Yeah, pretty much just
Okay.
we've been chatting a little bit. Steve and I have been chatting a little bit about, after school and why they should be part of the emergency operation planning and the fact that, it is a best practice. In some states it is required, in some states it's not. But either way, it's a best practice, whether you're in a school building or in a community building or of some nature.
Okay, great. Thanks for the recap. So yeah, Steve, so I think another question that often comes up is our out of school time programs that aren't on school grounds. So like our boys and girls clubs, our students leave and then they go to a boys and girls club or another youth club. And so in that instance, what I guess, how can those offsite campuses, I'm sorry, those offsite programs still have emergency management planning?
Yeah, a good question. And a lot of those facilities, specifically the Boys and Girls Clubs and the Y Clubs, the ones I'm familiar with, have really good emergency operations plans, but just making sure there's connectivity with those after school programs because there's so much going on in those centers all the time. But that relationship piece between the traditional K-12 school, where those students are coming from, is so critical too, for a variety of reasons. For weather, like we're having today, weather-related closures and information. I just heard my 2 teenagers get home because we're closing early in Georgia because of the potential for the threat of snow, less than 1 inch. Anyway, so for that, and then also, it's really important for those relationships because, we're seeing, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of school threats, and we're seeing students that may be a threat to themselves or a threat to others, or may have safety concerns about cyberbullying or whatever it may be that they encounter. So there needs to be some connectivity from that school to that, if it's an off-site facility, not managed by the school, about those particular students and how to report that safety concern if they hear a student at that Boys and Girls Club or that Y Club that's making a threat, or that maybe there's a fight at the center, and they really need to tell the school that, hey, it's coming on your doorstep the next day. So there needs to be this really good two-way communication from kind of what I would call an intel perspective, as well from emergency planning. The emergency planning piece is important because if the school's doing their drills and some of their safety practices in a certain way, it would be really good if that Y Club or if that Boys and Girls Center is doing it the same way, so as not to confuse the students. There needs to be that consistency, I guess you could say. It's really helpful for the students as well, and the staff.
Thank you, Steve, because that definite communication between programs that are not on school grounds and the school is so important. Even with some of the different behavior management that they've done, that they have the same exact, especially for K-5, that they have the same exact things going on. So I can see exactly how that would be with emergency management planning also.
So I have a follow-up question in that. So I'm curious. So we have the school day, or if it is a community-based center, we have our normal day operations. The 7 to 3 or the 8 to 4 or whatever that is. But a lot of times our after-school programs are in those non-traditional hours when not everybody on campus is there, and we go down from, the school nurse goes home sometimes, and the security guards sometimes go home, and sometimes we're operating in a little bit of a, not a skeleton staff, but more of a streamlined staff for the program specifically. So should we have 2 emergency operation plans? Should we have like one for the school day and then one for specifically for after school? And are there any resources out there that could help us do that if that's the case?
Yeah, really good question, Sean. Yeah, I think we're all familiar with doing more with less a lot of times. And so that's what happens. So basically, what you can do if you're on that traditional school site and maybe you're using a segment of that school, one of the things you can do is just utilize the school emergency plan, but then you customize it or shrink wrap it, if you will, if you're okay with that terminology, to fit the scope and to fit the diminished resources that you may have. So you may have individuals that may be fulfilling several different roles and responsibilities that were, where you had more people during the traditional school day, which points an emphasis on training and maybe some exercises and drills. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that later, so I don't want to preempt that discussion. But yeah, you don't have to reinvent the wheel in doing that. You can use some of those traditional emergency operations plans, but just make sure that, if you're sequestered to a couple of classrooms in the north side of the school and maybe the cafeteria, your evacuation areas are going to be different. Where you shelter students for maybe severe weather, maybe access to an automatic external defibrillator, or maybe your stop the bleed kits or medical kit may be differently. So some of your assets or things that you may utilize maybe in a different area. And so that's where you have to customize that emergency plan, and for the personnel, the reduced amount of personnel that you have. So we don't want people to go out and reinvent the wheel. And to your question about resources, of course, locally you can get some really good resources. Hopefully you're having that, as we talked about before, that relationship with that school-based emergency planning team, and some of the administrators. And what I've found, and we'll talk more about the invisible people in a minute, it's not a disparaging term, but a custodian often has, often compare them to Morgan Freeman in Shawshank Redemption, the movie. Some of you will remember that reference. I'm old, I know, but he's the person in that movie that could get you things and get you into things if you needed them, keys, access control, and things like that. So you need that contact person that can help you, kind of like the Morgan Freeman person that can help you with that. So, and then also, the REMS TA Center has a ton of great resources, including a map of the United States that shows your state, that can even drill down into, and I don't know if that's going to come up, but I think we have a link to it. You're good, Sean, or Dave, or whoever's doing that. But if you're seeing that map on the screen, what you can do when you go to the website, obviously the participants can't do it here, you can click on a particular state. If someone wants to do that, Georgia, thank you. And it brings up several different things. It brings up contacts for your state school safety center. It brings up a lot of different resources for your state Department of Education, as you're seeing here. State commission reports. Oftentimes it'll bring up some of the laws and regulations regarding school safety and emergency planning. So there's a lot of different mandates and a lot of different things. It's such a really good resource that provide you some of the state and local resources that you can tap into too. Now, again, locally, your emergency manager is often very helpful in knowing and connecting you with potentially some other good resources too. But this is really good as far as getting into your state resources. And some of your states have school safety centers that are really good, that provide you with, obviously state resources that may align with mandates and laws and drill and exercise requirements too as well. So thank you. I guess that was you, Sean, that did that. So thanks for displaying that resource.
I just love that. I mean, I'll be honest, I wish and shame on me for not knowing about this resource when I was in the field. Now, I was in the field a while back. So, back during the Shawshank Redemption, I was in the field. But that's great. So I could go to this map, I can find out, it seems like everything, the mandates, it even looked like when I clicked on Puerto Rico, it was in Spanish. Directly, so I could read it in Spanish if I wanted. That's that's awesome. What a great tool. Did you have a hand in building that?
Oh, I did not that. No, I've helped with some of the resources. There's a really good team. The RIMS team is really awesome and has been for 20 years in developing so many different great resources and trainings. And we'll talk more about those things too specifically. But there's a lot of stuff to help you.
That's awesome. I know we have a pretty rigorous chat room right now where folks are sharing a little bit about their thoughts. One of the biggest thoughts that I'm reading is, of course, that after school can look very different from the school day, and I know that's particularly around like drills and some things. So, Michelle, I think you had a question around that, around some drills and some hazards and some things that you wanted to ask Steve. Uh-oh, I think you might be muted there.
I'm sorry, it froze up again.
Oh,
I know I'm having quite the day. We're not even having the snow yet, so I'm not sure what's happening.
preliminary, it's preparing.
Right, right. So what are some examples of preparedness activities that our out of school time programs can participate in?
Lots of different preparedness activities. I mean, they can do. I mean, one of the things that's really important, and it may not be a mandate, is our exercises and drills. So once you get that plan, I would suspect many of you already have a emergency operations plan, and we'll talk about some ways to fine tune that. But have that drill or that exercise to make sure that the responses that you're doing actually work. And prior to that, hopefully you're training your staff, who may consist of retired teachers, paraprofessionals, college students, in the case of some of our programs here, because we're in a college town. So hopefully you're training them on a variety of things, including because we have a diminished group of people there, how to operate an AED. Do we have people that are trained in CPR? Do we have people that understand if we have a stop the bleed program involved, which incidentally we've saved some lives in the campuses of Georgia by having that stop the bleed program in place. I mentioned the invisible people, and a lot of times those are the connections to custodians, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, security personnel, people that the students often are not disciplined by, but they may say things in front of, or we can, get information. And they can also have trusted adult relationships with those individuals. So those are some people that we can rely on too for help as we're creating this culture of safety, security, and emergency preparedness. Visitor management is a very important one too. Lately, I've just read anecdotally of a couple of different incidents that's happened over the past couple of weeks where one of the most frequented areas for unauthorized people to enter in a school building is a cafeteria loading dock door. That's always one where people can get in or maybe act like they're a vendor or whatever. But when you have a program like an after school program in a traditional school facility, oftentimes, it's really important to make sure those exterior doors are not propped, that they're secure, that you still have that vetting process, because that would be a really opportune time, I guess, for a non-custodial parent or someone who, an intruder to get in and do harm. Hopefully rare situations, but it's very important. One of the things that I want to focus on really quick is propping of doors.
Mhm.
Now, I know that's not a problem in any of your schools. We even have like some slogans, "Stop the prop," that we try to get with students
Like that.
and teachers, because it's just coming. It's such a big problem. And there's a couple of different things that not only the safety issue that because you prop that door, even if it's only for 5 minutes while you're going to get cupcakes from your car or whatever it may be for a birthday party, you've compromised the safety of that entire facility. For that 5 minutes, and you provided a vulnerability. Usually the props are like bricks or blocks or wooden pieces. Those could be used as objects of vandalism at night, and have been. I mean, I'm using experiences to convey this, by breaking windows, or they could be in, a rare situation could be used as weapons if someone gets upset with someone to strike someone. So, it's really a bad kind of process or bad thing that we do. And so if we're creating that culture of safety, security, and emergency preparedness, that's one thing that we can really work on our visitor management.
Yeah,
So
I
those are a
agree.
couple of things.
I think it becomes habit, like for, people have just done it for so long that it became a habit.
It's Steve, I felt like you're calling me out when you were like, "Stop the prop," honestly, because when I was in the, we didn't have keys sometimes when I was in the after school program, just because for whatever reason we didn't have access keys, and yet all the doors locked. And so we would do exactly what you're saying. We would use a book. Sometimes we'd tape over the lock. We'd do whatever we could to keep the door open so that we could get back in. But then again, as you mentioned, and I honestly have never thought of the cafeteria loading dock as a way of entry. But one time I had a parent actually pick up their child, and we were freaking out because we didn't know where the child was. But they had walked through one of those doors that were propped open, and they grabbed their child without letting us know. And thank goodness it was the parent, the authorized parent, guardian of the child. But or goodness gracious, what if it was someone else, So what a great, I mean, I needed to be called out because I need to stop that behavior. Stop the prop. That's going to be my new motto.
And I'm using
Um,
that at my elementary school because I know we do it in the mornings because they want the students to go in and get breakfast into the cafeteria instead of going through the front office. But like you said, it's just something I'm using your slogan.
Hey, I'm seeing a couple of questions. I'm monitoring the chat too. I'm trying to
Yeah.
be
yeah.
a student. I'm seeing a couple of questions on exercises and drills. So I want to make a distinction really quickly,
Mhm.
if I may. When we talk about drills, those are the traditional drills that we talk about, like a fire drill. And these are maybe mandated by your state on certain ones that you may have to do in a certain number of years. Generally, most states do, 9 fire drills, one for every month. But some of you may have severe weather drills. Some of you may have mandated lockdown drills and things like that. So some people were asking in the chat about training. So, the connectivity to your school and those relationships that we talked about, this is where, particularly if you're in a school building, where we want to maintain that consistency of how we do our drills. So I would suggest that you get with the administrative team or get with that school emergency planning team and say, hey, I would like to observe some of your drills. I'm a OST program manager or supervisor. Can I observe? I know in your spare time, you don't have a lot of time. can I observe a traditional drill that you're doing so I can replicate that in my program in the afternoon and make sure I'm doing it consistently the way that you're doing it in the normal during the normal school day? Can I have some assistants doing this? Because you're in your building as well. And so there may be some administrative staff, maybe security, safety. Again, the local emergency management personnel are very familiar with that. So the drills are those baseline drills that most people are familiar with. When we start talking about exercises, there's a variety of those. The traditional ones that people think about that school and higher ed do is what's called a tabletop exercise, which is very good. And this is where you get the appropriate people that might be responding to a scenario on the table, and then someone's kind of a facilitator, and it's supposed to be low stress. And you read through there, and you kind of talk about, it's not time sensitive, of how you would respond as the program administrator, as the school police officer, as the a staff person or whatever, and you work through that. And then once you work through those scenarios, it's probably going to reveal that maybe, hey, we did this great. Maybe this was a challenge or an opportunity for improvement. So it's really important at the end of that to kind of debrief and discover where you did what you did well and where we need to improve, and then definitively formalize those into your emergency operations plan. So the next time you recognize that, or you may need a resource over here, or we may need another first aid kit over here, or whatever it is, and then you improve. Now, the REMS TA Center has a very robust section on exercises and drills and sample scenarios. There's also a section on there called a toolbox, which is user submitted from the field from other schools and universities that provide some of the things that they have used successfully, including how to do an after action. So, thank you. Perfect timing. So this is user submitted, and you all could, if you have some good promising programs and things that you want to help your colleagues, you can submit this too as well, using this toolbox on the REMS TA Center website. So you can see it has some search words. You can search for what you're looking for. It has K-12 or higher ed. And it has memorandums of understanding, MOUs. It has, planning checklist. It has exercises, drills, crisis communication fact sheet. I'm seeing one of those. It has really a lot of great information that is user submitted from individuals from the field, just like you all, that have a lot of applicability to what you're doing. So I'd encourage you, if you're doing something really well at your site or your center, to please submit that, because I would submit that there are probably a lot of other people that could utilize that resource, particularly if it's a planning resource or exercise or drill or scenario or something like that. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not taking up too much time, but I just saw several questions in the chat related to that, and I wanted to make sure we made that distinction. Thank you.
I appreciate that because, as we talk about exercise and drills, it is interesting, and I like it because it's an asset-based approach. It really is going back to that school safety guidelines, or if you're a community-based center, reaching out to the school too and partnering with the assets around you to figure out, what type of drills, as you said, you could implement, but then also what type of exercises could you do to enhance or learn. And I love that. An example just that I've had, just basis, I was thinking, we had an after school program in Texas where I live that the students were renovating a bus. They were taking an old school bus and they were converting it into kind of a mobile library. Great activity, but they were using circular saws and they were using some really interesting power tools. And these were middle school students, and they were being monitored, and they were practicing safety. But then we noticed there was not a first aid kit nearby. Like the nearest first aid kit was a good, 30 feet or 40 feet away, like inside the building. And so we did an exercise where we, we're like, what if this happened? What if, accidentally someone got cut, what would you do? And the kids were like, oh, we need a first aid kit in the bus. Like we need one right here, just in case, to at least, stop some type of bleeding if that were to happen, so that then we could progress. And so that only came about, in doing that. So I love the fact that you addressed that question and then shared resources, because what better way to learn than from each other? And what a great toolbox REMS has provided for us to partner. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just tap into what's there. So thank you. That's amazing. It brings up a question though, as I think about this informal school time, and we think about 21st century programs and everything. What what type of hazards and threats should we be thinking of? Like, is there the magical 8 ball that will tell us, like, be prepared for this, or is it just we should be prepared for everything? Or, uh, as a busy program leader, like you said, we have very little time, but also we have some state leaders on the line today who guide state policy. Are there some things that we should be kind of narrowing in on or focused on a little bit in your mind, Steve?
And some of the best places to start for resources would be your local individuals, because like in the state of Georgia, we have a, threats and hazards, threat being more adversarial in nature, like a bomb threat or an active shooter or cybersecurity. And then a hazard being, severe weather, flooding, those types of things, just to make sure we make that distinction. But we have a state template for plans for our schools that define a lot of different threats and hazards. But then because there's different threats and hazards in South Georgia versus Atlanta versus North Georgia, what we do is the schools then determine with their school-based emergency planning team, with the assistance of their local emergency management staff and fire department police, they determine what hazards have and threats have historically happened in their community, their county, their jurisdiction, because they have the best pulse on what's happening. And a lot of your local emergency county plans and what's called a hazard mitigation plan, those are produced locally in the county. They've already identified those threats and hazards for you, so you can kind of focus on those. So we're taking those, we're probably ranking them high priority, medium priority, and the team determines that. And again, I know some of you are going, oh my goodness, this sounds like a lot of work, but a lot of this is already done for you with the school plan or some of the local ones that you're dealing with. So you don't have to determine those unless there's something just like hyper local, like maybe you have a industrial site and it's right next to you and they have hazmat and you're worried about some type of hazardous material spill or something like that. Then that would be something that certainly you'd want to be cautious to. So yeah, a lot of that's already done for you. And I guess the word of caution that I'm seeing just from a best practice is I tend to see a lot of schools sometimes over focus on one threat to the detriment of others. So they're so worried about what is maybe been nationally, the news media is talking about this one particular threat, that they may forget that, yeah, we're seeing medical emergencies every day. And we really need to focus on that. Or we're seeing, severe weather, tornadoes, snowing, whatever it may be. And we really need to make sure we're doing drills or tabletop exercises and things like that, and not maybe including that national one that we're all worried about, because parents are worried and there's certainly an expectation that we cover that. But certainly we want to make sure that we not to the detriment of others, so that that could occur more often, if that makes sense. The other thing in relation to that is having backups for your role and responsibility if you're a program manager or a program supervisor. I see this a lot of times in schools where the principal is the main person and they have like a laundry list of roles and responsibilities during certain types of emergencies. And you're like, well, what happens if that principal is out of the building or that AP is out of the building? So think about it. If you're a program manager, who is your backup? And do they know their roles and responsibilities? Could they fill your shoes if you have, a spouse who has emergency surgery, or you can't make it to the center because, God forbid you have an accident or something, who's going to step in and take on those roles and responsibilities for you? And are they empowered? Do they know that they're supposed to do that? Because a lot of times we see that in traditional schools where, the AP was like, well, the principal always handles that. I don't know what to do. And that's not always the case, but then sometimes when we look at that. So just make sure that you're making sure that you have a good continuity in your emergency plan with backups, and they know what to do. And they know that if you're not there and they can't get in touch with you, they're up and they're ready to take the reins and the roles and responsibilities. That's something that I see a good bit that is lacking in some of our emergency plans and things traditionally in schools.
I just have to chime in. I know I need to turn it over to Michelle so that I'm not hogging all the time, but I love what you just said though, because I hear this all the time. It's like, oh, the principal deals with that. Well, what if the principal's on, on leave or sick or on vacation or something happen, who is the backup? And that's great. Like that's proactive safety planning right there. It's thinking through if this person was for whatever reason not here today, who would be the next step? And I love that. I think we need to take that into account. And before I turn the time over to Michelle to ask another question, and talk, I know we want to get into this invisible role thing or whatever that is. It seems a little mysterious, so I want to make sure we address that. But we do have a couple of answers in the Q&A that we're going to be answering. But if we don't get to everyone on the line, please know that we're recording this and we are saving the Q&A, and we will get back to everybody and we will post those resources. But I just wanted to share with everybody before I turn over to Michelle for her next question.
Thanks, Sean. So what are some assets that you think that already exist within after-school programs that could benefit the school safety? So you talked about before Boys and Girls Clubs and why programs might have their, they have their own emergency operations planning possibly, but what could other OST programs do that could benefit the school?
Yeah, there's a couple of REMS TA Center web resources. I don't know if Sean, if you have those, there's one, the Building Blocks Toolkit. I see you frantically working on your keyboard there, which is good. So I'll hold a minute and just mention the other ones too as well. There's also what's called EOP, which is Emergency Operations Plan, as we've been discussing, assess. So this is a really unique thing. It's a way to evaluate your emergency operations plan from your center, whether it's school-based or whether it's Boys and Girls Club, Y Club, whatever. You can use this and answer some questions using this system, 15 minutes max to do it. And then what it does is it just automatically generates a report for you and kind of gives you where you are, your status, if you will, on what you on how your EOP looks and where you may need to improve on some things. So it's really cool where you can use that. But first up, because Sean has this up, the Building Blocks Toolkit is just a really comprehensive way of looking. You can see the table of contents. It has, what we talked about, the principles of creating a high quality school emergency operations plan, the 6-step process that I mentioned that's really foundational in doing this. And you can use this not only to develop your emergency operations plan, to evaluate your existing plan, and then maybe, to take a few sections that you don't feel like are really robust and maybe evaluate those and improve those. So it doesn't just you don't have to throw out everything you have. You can use this to kind of check what you're doing and see if it's in alignment with best practices and alignment with your current threats and hazards that's showing up on the screen and things like that. So it's a really comprehensive document that you can go through, and it goes over a lot of, or covers a lot of the REMS TA Center resources as you review some of the processes and things too. So this is a really good thing to kind of start with, maybe foundationally, as you're looking at this, as you're looking at your plan and looking at your safety program and emergency planning. To kind of look at and go through. So this may be your first step when you're looking at this. And then the EOP assess could maybe be your second step, because it's a really good, again, it doesn't take long. It's 15 minutes. The other one, and thank you, Sean, for pulling that up. The other one is site assess. And I know we're throwing out a lot of acronyms and things like that. So it may seem overwhelming, but this one's really important. It's a site assessment app. So it's free. It's very, very comprehensive. I have it on my phone. I utilize it. So this is like if you have a group of individuals, and I do this a lot too. We go like with the principal, facilities person, SRO, school resource officer, law enforcement, fire, emergency management, and we go and look at a school site. So this is a guided tutorial or a guided app that allows you to ask questions about safety, security, and emergency planning for a variety of different areas within and outside the school and school grounds, policy issues, procedures, things like that. So it kind of guides you And then what it does is you check off and you can indicate if you need to, improve a situation. You can take pictures in this app, and then you can download. It'll automatically generate kind of a short-term and long-term report of how you can improve with pictures, with descriptions. You can download it in a variety of formats, and share the report with your public safety partners or school folks and things like that. I would encourage you that you may not want to take this on as a after school OST program leader. You'd want to do this in conjunction with the regular school program, unless you're at a independent center. Then you could certainly use this resource too for a Y club or Boys and Girls Club or community center as well. It's certainly applicable to those areas too. You may not utilize all the different sections, but those are really good ways to evaluate that.
Yeah, those are
Really quickly, and I'm sounding like Sean. I'm flying over in the other direction. Sorry, Sean, but I told you, I warned you about this. But it is applicable to some of the snow that we're talking about. One of the personal preparedness things that we've learned, we talked about lessons learned and how we can improve in things. We learned from our 2014 snowpocalypse in Atlanta, where everybody was stranded on the highways and things like that, that it's good for all of us, including you and your staff at your OST, to have personal preparedness plans. So ready.gov, it's affiliated with FEMA, Federal Organization, Federal Emergency Management Agency, has the recommendations there. But if you think about it, what happened in the snowpocalypse for us is the ice and snow crept up on us and stranded everybody, and we didn't have the roads salted and ready. So people were stranded on the expressway, which meant they couldn't go pick up their child from a traditional school or aftercare program. And so think about it. If you're the aftercare program leader and the staff there, you may not be able to get out either. And you've got all these kids that are under your care. So you need to have your family communications plan and your personal plan worked out with your spouse, your grandparents, your parents, whoever it may be, such that they can go, help take care of your cat, your dog, your kids, whatever. Because what we saw that some teachers just really, a couple of them just left. They walked. And of course, they were probably fired, but they just did not have a good plan. And they said, I'm going to get charged, $10 a minute if I don't go pick up my kid at the after school program or daycare or whatever. So by having that plan in place, a personal emergency preparedness plan and a good communication plan, you avoid those situations because you can make that call or text or whatever with that person that you have that plan with and a backup. And you don't put yourself in that situation, because a lot of those facilities, unfortunately, had to spend the night in that school building. Some of them got out later when they could get transportation, four-wheel drive transportation in and things like that. But they had an extended day. Now, that could also happen if there's a law enforcement event next to your facility, if there's a extended shelter in place because of a hazmat incident, extended lockdown. That could happen in the after-school programs that might not be weather related. Where you have to stay a little bit longer. So plan for that. It's really good to have that personal emergency plan for a variety of situations so that you're not stuck in that situation, if that makes sense. But I thought that was a good example to bring up, considering the weather right now for some of us.
I mean, definitely with natural disasters. I mean, I just learned something. I have three small children that are all over my county. So yeah, having that personal plan, I think, is very, very important. Especially like you said, you don't want your people to walk on you. And when you have, you're overseeing 90 children and then all of a sudden it all shuts down. So you definitely need that support still. So thank you for that.
I'm thinking too, as you're talking about it, I'm like, what a great family engagement activity that could be. Like, gather together and bring up ready.gov and in a time when it's like warm and everybody's happy and everything's comfortable, like that proactive side of things. But really digging into these resources and sharing that with families. Cause yeah, my daughter, my oldest daughter, 18-year-old, is off at college and she's 5 hours away. And we're, my wife and I sometimes freak out. Like, even though in Texas it's only an inch of snow, we're like, oh my gosh, is she driving on it and everything? One of the things I did for her is I put together that emergency kit for her car, you know, And then I realized I did that for her car, but I haven't done it for my own or my wife's. I'm like, and so sometimes we do this planning for our programs, and we do this planning for school and for the businesses that we work in, but we don't do it, like you said, for our home. And then what do we do if we're snowed in or flooded, or if we're separated overnight from our children because they're in another facility and the communication's down? Like, what is our plan? So that's great. What a great family engagement activity that could become. So I love that. And the resources are right there on the REMS website. So I see Dr. Ferguson, Candace has her hand up. I think she wants to chime in too.
I do, if I can, just for a second, because the conversation is really great and we're seeing a lot of good feedback in the chat. And even Janelle and I are kind of talking back and forth about our ideas, are spinning. But I think one thing that you said too, Steve, and we talked about this very, very high level in the opening, were those 5 mission areas. And just listening to you talk and thinking through those, I don't know if when I'm finished here, maybe I'll just pop them in the chat real quick. But as I read those, it reminds me of everything that after school programs or out of school programs do. And so I'll just mention them real quickly. Prevention, that's what we're talking about today, right? And this is really kind of what sparked the idea for this series, is how can out of school time programs help to prepare for events? In this case, we're talking about asset-based approaches to community violence, but you see very quickly how the conversation has turned to all of the other events that we need to be prepared for. Protection, we're talking about planning. How can we make sure that we're putting procedures and processes in place to ensure that we're protecting our assets, our children and our families? The response and recovery piece, what those two really remind me of was COVID. And you all, we saw what happened after COVID and how out of school time programs really stepped up to kind of play that response and recovery mode, where we had our, first responders that had to go to work and there was nobody there to educate their children. And so many of our after school programs, our 21st century programs, opened up and they kind of were there to provide that response and play that recovery option, as well. And so when I think about that, the last is mitigation, but it really, as I'm just, looking at the big picture, also heard some stories, coming out of the horrible tragedy that happened in Uvalde, and how the out of school time programs and the community programs really rallied to provide that needed support for both response and recovery after an emergency. And so just thinking about those, those 5 mission areas and the role that out of school time programs play is so critical. Everything that you're talking about is so critical here today. I did want to just add too, because somebody asked this question very early on in the chat about, in thinking about those 5 mission areas, about how often, what are the best practices to conduct this type of training? In our first session, we asked this question of participants, and we got the gamut. We got some people do it once a month. We got some people do it once a year. And we got some people don't really do it in their out of school time programs. So is there, Steve, like a best practice standard for how often this type of training should be conducted?
Well, it depends. Well, if we're talking about your emergency plan, the updates on it, at minimum a year, each year you should update your emergency plan, which would require some training on that. But then when you're talking about situational awareness, when you're talking about how to report threats and what are the mechanisms to connect with a school and what are we looking for as far as safety concerns, or CPR and things like that. CPR is every 2 years, generally, with American Heart Association. As much as you can. I know you have time limitations and things. At minimal, hopefully, if you get new staff in, or at the beginning of the school year, you're doing some type of orientation or some type of new training, where maybe you bring in some professionals from the school, so you have, again, that consistency, or maybe you're bringing in law enforcement or fire or emergency management to conduct some of those specific situational awareness things, or someone from the behavioral threat assessment team in the school or the district that can talk about certain safety concerns that OST staff may want to report or can report, and how they can report those to the school and the school district. So minimally, once a year. If you can get another one in, or maybe another, or if you're having certain instances of door propping, or maybe you're having some non-custodial parents that are coming in trying to approach staff and things like that. Maybe you need to have a remedial training, maybe in in the middle of the year, around the holidays or something, or the first of the year, as the school year goes, to support a certain training topic. But definitely more than one time a year, if you can, would be important, because these things are a lot of times we forget if we don't practice them, or if we're not practicing them in a drill or whatever. So hopefully you could get that, particularly for new staff. But as you get new staff in, as the year progresses, certainly you'd want to expose them to this training as well. I hope that answers your question, Candace. Okay.
Well, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Candace. The great thing that Candace did is she brought us back and centered us back into the process, which is why she's in her role. It's because she guides us there. But she led us back to that safety, those 5 areas, which really I know the REMS TA Center has really thought through, and all the tools and resources align with that. But I know there was one more item that we just wanted to really highlight before we because we're a little bit at time to move on to our next section, but I do want to get this out because I think, Steve, you highlighted this as something that we should share because it's a great way to start thinking about how to get started. Could you tell us a little bit more about this fact sheet and how it could be used to really get started on emergency management planning? And while it may be focused on school, it can definitely be applied broadly to after school and community-based organizations as well, I believe.
Yeah, and thank you, and I sure can, because I helped develop this fact sheet. So yeah, for many years I've been kind of teaching like these top 10 low cost 10 strategies. So I work with the REMS TA Center, and we kind of developed it into a checklist using a lot of information, case studies, and things like that. But it just lists, as I know I've used this word a lot, but it's important foundational type things that sometimes we forget, like partnering with your local first response agencies, those relationships that are so important, focusing on all hazards, emergency planning, doing the site assessments that we talked about. And this is kind of sequentially as we're talking about this. These are some of those things. And this document highlights a lot of the resources that we've talked about as you're scrolling through it. You can kind of refreshes your memory. We've talked about some of these things, talked about visitor management and the importance of that. So this kind of is like the top 10 things that I do. And obviously the Department of Ed and REMS TA Center thinks it's important too. Some of the things that we should be doing and thinking about as we're looking at our emergency planning, safety, and security efforts in creating that culture of safety, security, and emergency preparedness. So it just gives you a lot of different information. And then also it gives you some examples of some things and some really practical information on how to do these types of things, and kind of some checklists, and again, some links to some other resources. So this is another really good document that if you're looking for that, one-stop shop, powerful punch, the toolkit is good too, but this is also another good one that just gives those reminders, because some of you are probably, a little bit further along than others maybe in this process. So that's another good resource too. Thanks for doing that, or saying that. There's also a podcast that was recently put out. The REMS TA Center does a lot of really good podcasts, one on emergency preparedness for after school programs. I think it was number 34. Don't quote me on that. But it's also, if you get on the REMS TA Center website, Sean, you don't have to try to pull this up. If you get on the REMS TA Center website and you get in the search bar, you could just put in podcast, and it'll take you to the list of the podcasts. I use that search bar a lot to help me find a lot of the different resources. And that may be a good little shortcut for you.
Well, thank you so much. I know we could probably spend another hour chatting about the multitude of resources, the processes, procedures, your experience with schools. And so we cannot, I know Michelle and I are so thankful for your time, Steve, jumping online today and sharing more with us and answering questions. We have a very robust chat going on, back channel going on. We have some great questions that have been brought up. So lots of, and then Janelle and others have been in the chat, just really like throwing out resource after resource after resource on where we could go. And so I cannot thank you, first of all, for what you do every day, Steve, like living this life and advising people and setting up great practices for people to live in. And just wow. And the fact that you're so down to earth, you're like, yeah, this is how it works and this is real, and I just appreciate that from a down to earth person. I like to hear it from a practitioner. It's nice to see it. So thank you. Um, if I may, if Michelle will let me, I'm going to ask that maybe we could reserve like 3 minutes of your time at the very end before we close to come back on and give us kind of some inspiring words of wisdom as we close out. Would it be okay to bring you back in about 10 minutes or so?
Absolutely. Happy to help.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, everyone, you've heard from Steve. He's still on the line, by the way, if you want to chat through the chat with him. He's here. Our team is still here. We have about 13 more minutes to wrap up today, but we did want to kind of transition into just a few other items. And so, Michelle, I have a question for you. And so this is like me putting you on the spot, if I may.
That's okay.
Are you game for that?
I'm game for it.
All right, perfect. So, we've been talking a lot about physical safety, making sure our facilities are safe and secure. And Candace brought us back to the five mission items that REMS TA has really, outlined and built resources around. But I understand when we think about an assets-based approach to community violence prevention and intervention, there may be more than just physical safety, right? What would that be?
Yeah, physical safety, it's really important. All the things that Steve talked about are very important for us to have in place. But we also have to look at the emotional and social impacts that different things that happen could really affect our students. And they may experience things when they're within their communities or within their schools that are really above and beyond their physical safety concerns that they have. So we really want to look at those impacts of social emotional and really think about it's not just their physical safety, but a lot of times it could be, their internal, if they're connected, if they have a sense of belonging, if they feel like their well-being is up in front and what that looks like. And so one of the best ways that we've talked about within NTAC is with restorative practices and youth engagement, and what we can do with restorative practices.
So we actually have a course around this, right? Like on our learning management system, shameless plug here, everybody. But on our learning management system, we have a course, right? Could you share a little bit more about that?
We do. And so within the Guiding Positive Student Behavior course, there is some really great information in that talks about restorative practices, gives examples of it, and different ways that it can be used. Also, we have another really great resource that is a toolkit, and it provides different practices to address behavior. And then also the methodology is much broader around the impact that it's making on the students. So what exactly do we do with restorative practices that can help students with social and emotional?
And just to highlight, in efforts of time, we're not actually going to take you to the website, but if you go to the INTAC website, and you create a user ID, you can actually log into our learning management system and our knowledge network portal, or our professional learning portal overall is what we call the whole system. And you can actually access this course and download this toolkit. And I understand there are pieces of this particular course that highlight that restorative practice model. But as we think about restorative practices, Michelle, what is it? I mean, I hear restorative and I'm thinking, like, okay, so you're going to restore something. What does that mean? Like, how do I do that? Could you give us a little bit more context around that?
Yeah, I think when we say restorative practices, some people think that it's just a way for us to address behavior, behavior issues that are happening. It's just a strategy for addressing behaviors. But it really goes way beyond that, because not only can restorative practices be used to resolve conflicts, there's also a really larger approach where it is changing the entire program's climate. So, it's not just addressing behaviors. We want restorative practices to help students. They need to learn how to process emotions. A lot of times, especially our K-5s, they don't even have a really good emotional vocabulary. They're still at sad and mad. And so, learning to process emotions. Older students, secondary ed, same thing. We want them to be able to identify the impacts of the behavior, what they're doing. And we also, on all accounts, through restorative practices, they can learn how to foster empathy. They start to assume accountability for their actions, and then also practice compassion for others.
Interesting. So I'm gonna try to share an example, a personal story, and you tell me if this is like kind of hitting the mark or not. But we in the Houston area when I worked for full disclosure, everyone, I worked in Texas and still live in Texas, but I did after school programs in Texas, and we had a particular area of Houston where we had two rival high schools. Um, we had one high school that was they were literally only blocks away from each other, but they were rival high schools, and they had been rival high schools for years. And due to some various rezoning and some cost saving initiatives and everything, the two high schools were combined into one. And anybody who's ever had that with two rival, it was kind of like West Side Story. It was kind of like, like two rival groups coming together, and it was a little bit of chaos. And in the after school program there, we had these two high schools, and we tried to put the two after school programs together. And we found, I would love to say it was perfect and everybody just got along, and we all played basketball together and it was perfect. But we had some challenges. So the site coordinator implemented something called circle time. And like at the beginning, and I'll be honest, I thought it was not really going to be effective. But we started, and the idea was that the kids would get together in small groups of 15 to 20 each, and they would be in like a circle. And it started with simple questions like, who's your favorite singer? And it was Houston, so it's Beyonce, Jay-Z, they were very popular. Um, and so the kids started chatting, and then it delved into some deeper questions, and it was like, um, what do you think uh, is courageous? What do you think justice means? What does equity mean? And they started delving into some really tough conversations. And one thing we discovered is as they did this, again, I was skeptical because, I'm just like, what, but the kids started opening up and they're like, oh, you know, you like Jay-Z, I like Jay-Z too, and they started connecting, and it wasn't perfect. The kids didn't suddenly get together and start playing basketball together, but it definitely helped build camaraderie. And over time, the two programs integrated very well together. Is that something that you would call restorative practice? Is that like a technique?
Yeah, definitely. The circle, restorative circles, or circle time is just like you said, it's a great way for them to be able to find commonalities, and be able to take those. And, when you know something about someone, it's much easier to feel compassion and empathy and those feelings. When you know nothing about them. And like you said, it could have escalated into a really intense community violence situation. But by doing these circles and getting the students to discuss, what they like, what they don't like, it kind of took away all of that energy that may have escalated into something, more violent than what was already happening.
I love it. Full disclosure, I totally used it on my kids, like my own children. Like my two daughters were fighting, and I was like, go to your room and write everything you like about your sister. And then I made them do that, and then they had to share with each other in that format. So I used it and it worked. So
Yeah,
but
you learned stuff about people that you didn't even know how they felt. So, and it's good to feel that way when you're the person receiving that.
well, I know we're going to be delving in our next webinar and future webinars a little bit more on restorative practice. We're going to build on this, on the foundation of physical safety, just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're going to build on the safety and security, and then we're going to go into a little bit more of restorative practice and really get into that youth engagement piece as our series goes around. But I think we wanted to leave everybody kind of with this idea that in restorative environments, um, everyone can grow, learn, and value self and others. Whether that's focused specifically on physical safety, whether it's focused on restoring, something that has been diminished, either emotionally or socially. That's kind of our phrase from Sabrina Lindsay Law out of Education Week that we're going to share. But Michelle, I want to turn it over to you to kind of give us some key takeaways to think about.
Yeah, sure, Sean. We covered a lot of information today. We got a lot of great resources from Steve. I mean, there was a lot that was coming at you. So, if there's really just 5 key takeaways that you leave with today, just remember proactive safety planning is critical, and to make it a priority. And as I leave here today, I'm thinking about my own personal planning to do for my own family. And as Dr. Ferguson said, utilizing those 5 mission areas: prevention, protection, response, recovery, and mitigation. The third thing being collaborative partnerships and utilizing restorative practices. That course that we mentioned, that's in the NTAC Learning Center, 1 hour. You can do it quick, get it over with, or do it in little chunks. And then that youth engagement matters. We looked at that. We viewed that video in the very beginning from Montana programs. And, we really want that youth voice. And then the 5th thing, resources and partnerships. Partnerships are so important. If you're, the 21st Century Learning Centers program, getting with your administrators, getting on those teams, getting to be part of, what's going on in the school. If you're not, you're offsite, connecting with the school.
I love that. Thank you. Along with resources and partnerships, I will once again highlight our series. But before I jump into that and turn some time over to Steve to kind of give us our closing thought, I thought I would ask Dave or Capella, whomever would like to do this, but if you could put our survey link. One thing we value tremendous, just like we engage the youth on their thoughts and we engage everyone in safety planning and we engage everyone in restorative practices, we, the NTAC, engage you to improve our services because we really are here to build your capacity and help you in the field. And so we cannot do that without feedback. So please, we'd ask you, please take our feedback survey. That gives us information on how we can improve our services because we're here to serve you and we're excited to make sure our offerings are meeting your needs as you go out and serve kids every single day. And with that in mind, don't forget our webinar series. We have 6. We're on the 2nd one today that we're just wrapping up, but we have 4 more. So be on the lookout for the latter part of February for our next webinar series where we're going to talk about, kind of that requirement, that monitoring, that evaluation of safety plans, particularly as it applies to standards and accountability, and yet with an assets-based approach. So that's going to be an interesting twist for us to do that. How do you do standards and accountability from an assets-based approach? Don't worry, we got it down. So we're going to share with you. And we have another, we're going to bring back the REMS TA Center, but we have some other partners that we're also going to be bringing in to assist as well. So with that in mind, Steve, I'm going to throw up a call to action so people can read that. But as people are reading that, taking the survey, can you jump back online and tell us, you have like 90 seconds to give us kind of a closing inspirational message to make sure everybody's safe or whatever you would like to say. Time is yours.
Ooh, 90 seconds. All right. I can do it, Sean. All right. So just to reemphasize the importance of preparedness, planning, and training. non-school story. Many of you, all of us remember 9/11 and the World Trade Center attack. There was a gentleman, Rick Rescorla, who was the security director and safety director for Morgan Stanley pre 9/11 for many years. And what he did is he got all their 2,800, 2,900 employees, and based on several floors, he trained them on the emergency plan. He got them to actually rehearse what they would do and get away from their phones. Now, you know, Morgan Stanley, if they're not on their phone, they're not making money, right? This is a really large organization. So he got them to do that. He got flashlights, vests, he got all kind of things. There's a really good culture of safety, security, and emergency preparedness. And so they were practicing, they were doing everything, they were training new employees, everything. So when 9/11 happened, they all sprang into action. They knew exactly what to do. He was like, you know, on his PA, on a bullhorn, telling everybody what to do, and everybody evacuated. All their employees, except for 3 people, including Rick, got out of the World Trade Center in time before the collapse, based on all the great preparedness, prevention, and good response work that they did. So if I can't think of a more inspirational story on the importance of being prepared, training, exercising your plan, having a good plan, more so than that. So take that one. That's a really good inspirational story for me that I always like to reflect on and remember. So it is important, and it's something that can help you during an emergency. So thank you so much for your time. Be safe out there, and thanks again.
Wow, thank you, Steve. What a powerful story. That's gonna stick with me for the I don't know, for a long, long time. So I'm going to retell that story and credit it to you for telling that story. So thank you. We do have some call to actions for everybody, but before I turn the time over to Michelle to wrap us up, totally, I want to give once again, Steve, thank you. A big thank you to the REMS TA Center, Janelle Hughes, who's on the line, as well as the rest of the TA center members who are on the line. Big thank you to Dr. Janelle Wood for joining us, and to the other individuals from Ed who have guided us and led us to this place today where we can support you. Thank you, Dr. Ferguson and the Intact team. And Michelle, we have a couple of call to actions and then some things to stay informed, right?
Yes, we do. And I'll do this quickly because we're over time and we respect your time. But call to actions, apply the strategies that you learned. Please, like, bring, even if it's the smallest thing, back into your OST program, one of those tools that Steve spoke about, just to get you going, assess what's already happening in your program, and maybe a few steps that you can take from there. Definitely share your stories of success with us. Just like that 9/11 story, we're going to give Steve credit, but we'll probably say it again a few times as we're training and talking about all of the work we're doing. And then don't miss the next webinar. Our next webinar, we will have put out dates and have it in our newsletter, which is you see here on this screen. If you don't already subscribe to our newsletter, please do. And you'll find out more about our upcoming webinars and resources and tools that are coming out. And follow us on social media. We have some really great things that come out through there about different podcasts and topics and content that we're putting out through NTAC. So thank you everyone for being with us today.